I want you to run a quick thought experiment with me today. Imagine you're just sitting in a perfectly quiet room, and you hear a single clear musical note played on a grand piano.
Just a totally standard, normal note.
Exactly. It rings out, it slowly fades, and it feels completely normal. But now imagine a second note plays right after it.
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
But this second note is just a tiny microscopic fraction of a pitch off from the first one. Like, we are talking about a difference of just a few cents.
And, to put that into perspective for everyone, a cent is literally 1/100th of a semitone.
Right.
A semitone is the distance between two adjacent keys on a piano.
Yeah.
So we're talking about taking that tiny distance between, say, a white key and a black key and slicing it into 100 microscopic slivers of sound.
Which is a measurement so incredibly small that most people wouldn't even be able to quantify it if you showed it to them on a frequency chart.
Oh, absolutely not.
You don't just hear that difference. You physically feel it. It creates this almost immediate, visceral sense of disturbance in your body.
Yeah, it's a very real physical reaction.
Right, like a tiny tightening in your chest, or the hairs on your arms might stand up. And it begs this massive question: why does something so mathematically tiny feel so profoundly wrong?
Well, it feels like a fundamental mistake, a mistake that your brain is desperately trying to fix, but it just can't.
Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a stack of sources exploring this incredibly strange, slightly unsettling world of microtonality. But we are absolutely not looking at this as some dry academic exercise in mathematics or music theory.
Right, because that's not the interesting part.
Exactly. We are looking at microtonality as a profound tool for emotional disruption. We're looking at why musicians spend their entire lives trying to engineer that exact feeling of unease in you.
And the source material proposes a rather radical thesis to explain that unease. What if dissonance, that ugly, clashing, uncomfortable feeling you get when a note is supposedly wrong, what if that isn't actually a property of the music itself?
That is such a wild concept.
Right. What if the dissonance is a mechanism happening entirely inside your brain?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why these wrong notes disturb us so much, we first have to understand the invisible rules we have been culturally programmed to accept as completely normal.
Yeah, the rules we don't even realize are rules.
Exactly. If you grow up in Western culture, you are fed a very specific musical mythology from the time you're a baby. You learn that major chords equal happy.
And minor chords equal sad.
Right. An octave is a complete thought. A fifth is stable. We are surrounded by these rules to the point where we mistake them for the literal laws of nature. We treat a piano keyboard like it's a map of gravity.
But nature didn't invent the piano. I mean, the standard tuning system that the piano uses and that almost all Western music uses is called 12-tone equal temperament.
12 equally spaced notes.
Right. It divides the octave into 12 perfectly equally spaced notes. But the crucial thing to understand here is that this wasn't handed down by the universe as the perfect way to organize sound. Fundamentally, it's just an engineering compromise.
Wait, hold on. Are you telling me that Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, they were essentially writing masterpieces on a compromised, artificially engineered system?
Yeah, I am.
Because that feels almost blasphemous to anyone who loves classical music.
I know it sounds wild, but it's totally true. Think about it from a purely mechanical standpoint. If you are building an instrument with fixed keys, like an organ or a piano, you run into a mathematical nightmare when you try to change keys.
Like moving from C major to F sharp major.
Exactly. In pure natural physics, the distances between notes aren't perfectly even. So if you tune a piano to sound mathematically perfect in the key of C, it will sound horrifically out of tune if you try to play a song in F sharp.
So you would literally have to stop the concert and physically retune every string on the piano just to play the next song.
Precisely. So centuries ago, instrument makers and composers just agreed to fudge the math. They took that natural out-of-tuneness and spread it evenly across all 12 notes. Yeah, every single key on a modern piano is actually slightly, deliberately out of tune from pure harmonic physics. But it allows a musician to play in any key on a single instrument.
So it's a system built entirely for human convenience.
Exactly. It's for convenience, not because it represents the continuous natural spectrum of sound.
I was trying to wrap my head around this rigid 12-note system
Yeah.
while going through the sources. And the best analogy I could come up with is Lego blocks.
Oh, I like that.
It feels like Western culture decided to build our entire musical universe exclusively out of Legos. It is neat, the pieces click together easily, and you can build incredibly complex, towering structures with them.
But it's very grid-like.
Exactly. You are forcing a rigid, blocky grid onto a universe that is naturally full of continuous, sweeping, fluid shapes. I mean, a Lego sphere is never a true sphere. It always has jagged edges.
And we've just universally accepted the edges of those blocks as the absolute limits of reality.
So, if the Western 12-note system is just this engineered grid, just one highly specific way to organize sound for convenience, how does the rest of humanity interact with sound?
Oh, it's so different.
Because if we step outside that Western grid, the sources show a picture that is wildly different.
Are vastly different, yeah. The majority of human history completely ignores this 12-note limitation. And it's not just that they use different instruments, they have an entirely different philosophical relationship with pitch.
Right, like the sources mentioned Indonesian gamelan music.
Yes. Take gamelan, for example.
The sources went into this, but I had a hard time visualizing it. How does gamelan completely bypass the Western grid?
So gamelan ensembles are made up of these beautiful bronze percussive instruments, right? Metallophones and gongs. But the real key is in the tuning.
Okay.
Instead of trying to make two instruments play the exact same pitch, gamelan makers deliberately tune paired instruments slightly out of phase with each other.
Wait, on purpose?
Entirely on purpose. When they're struck at the same time, the sound waves actually clash in the air.
So they are intentionally creating dissonance.
Well, in a Western context, we call it dissonance. But in gamelan, it creates this incredible acoustic phenomenon called ombak, which translates to wave.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The clashing frequencies cause the sound to physically shimmer and throb. The friction between the notes is the entire point. It creates a living, breathing texture that a perfectly tuned piano can never, ever achieve.
That completely flips the script. Instead of avoiding the space between the notes, they are harvesting it.
Uh-huh.
And the sources point out this isn't just an Indonesian concept, right?
Not at all. Look at Middle Eastern traditions like the Arabic makam or the Turkish makam. They don't use 12 notes. They often divide the octave into 24 distinct pitches.
24.
Yeah, they heavily utilize what we call quarter tones.
Well, let me clarify that for a second. If you look at a piano, a quarter tone would be the invisible note hiding directly in the crack between a white key and a black key.
Exactly. It's a pitch that simply doesn't exist on our Western map. And in traditions like the Persian daska or the Indian raga, the notes aren't even fixed points.
Right, they're always moving.
The musicians use flexible, continuously moving pitches that glide, bend, and swoop. The pitch is relative to the emotional moment, not a fixed point on a grid.
This was the most mind-bending realization for me. We sit here in the West thinking our 12-tone tuning is the universal default of human biology.
Yeah, we really do.
But to listeners who are raised in these rich, fluid traditions, our normal Western tuning actually sounds strangely robotic. It sounds rigid, like the music is trapped in a cage.
It's totally cultural.
What we think of as biological normalcy is purely cultural programming.
And that cultural programming is incredibly deep. It literally wires the physical architecture of how your brain processes auditory information.
Which brings us to the actual neuroscience of why a microtonal note, a note falling between those piano keys, causes such an intense physical reaction in you.
Right, because if these rules are just cultural, why does your body physically panic?
Exactly. Why do I get that tight chest when I hear a note that is just a few cents off? My biology shouldn't care if a note is halfway between C and C sharp.
Well, to understand that physical panic, we have to look at the brain as a prediction machine.
Yeah.
Your auditory cortex isn't just passively sitting there receiving sound like a microphone.
It's doing math, basically.
It is a highly active, aggressively calculating engine. Based on the cultural programming you've absorbed since birth, your brain calculates probabilities. With every single note it hears, it is desperately asking, what comes next?
It wants to know the future so it can prepare the body.
Yes. And when the music does what your brain expects it to do, your brain experiences a successful prediction. It rewards you. It relaxes.
Hence, pop music.
Right. Most pop music is fundamentally designed to minimize what neuroscientists call prediction error. You get the classic 4-chord progression, you get exactly what you expect, and it feels deeply, chemically satisfying.
But experimental music does the opposite.
Experimental music, and specifically microtonality, weaponizes prediction error. It maximizes it.
Here is where it gets really interesting and honestly almost uncomfortable to think about. I want you to imagine you're at a bar, and someone gets up to sing karaoke.
Oh no, I can already hear it.
Right. And they are singing slightly flat. I don't mean totally off-key where it's comical and you can just laugh with your friends about how bad it is. I mean, they are almost correct.
The absolute worst kind of bad singing.
Yes. They are hovering right on the bleeding edge of the right note, but they never quite hit the center of it.
That is pure, unadulterated agony to listen to.
It is. You feel immediate physical tension.
Right.
You experience secondhand embarrassment, anxiety. Your shoulders literally tense up.
Yeah.
But why?
Because your brain is desperately trying to correct that pitch internally. From an evolutionary standpoint, uncertainty is dangerous.
So it's a survival instinct.
In a way, yeah. Your auditory cortex is reaching out to grab that singer's note and pull it onto a familiar Lego block. It's searching for certainty, but because the singer is hovering in the microtonal space between the keys, that certainty never arrives.
The brain just gets stuck.
It gets trapped in a continuous loop. The prediction error cannot be resolved, the data doesn't compute, so what you are experiencing isn't actually bad music.
What's an error code?
Exactly. You are experiencing the pure, raw, neurological sensation of uncertainty.
Which completely short-circuits how we process feelings. Because usually we hear a musical structure and we use it as a shortcut.
Right, like a roadmap.
Yeah. We hear a minor chord and our brain immediately says, okay, this is a sad song. I'm supposed to feel melancholy now. We have a roadmap for our emotions.
But microtonal intervals bypass those familiar harmonic shortcuts entirely. Because you're not hearing a major or a minor structure, your brain doesn't know what you're supposed to feel.
So the emotion actually arrives before the melody even makes sense to you.
That's a really fascinating way to frame it. Without those recognizable structures, listeners are stripped of their emotional safety nets.
You're just floating.
Yeah, you hear a pitch that falls between the cracks, and instead of your brain handing you a neat label like, this is sad, you are forced into a state of suspension. You have to actively ask yourself, what exactly am I feeling right now?
The uncertainty itself becomes the primary emotion.
Exactly. It manifests as raw confusion, deep curiosity, unease, and sometimes profound wonder.
It's like being blindfolded and dropped into a foreign country without a map. It's terrifying because you don't speak the language. But it's exhilarating because the rigid rules of your hometown no longer apply.
Right. The world suddenly opens up.
And if this music creates such intense unease and wonder, we have to talk about the masterminds who deliberately provoke this. The composers who looked at the 12-note limit and flat out rejected it.
It really is a story of escalating rebellion.
It is. You start with someone like Charles Ives in the early 20th century. He was imagining and writing scores for entirely alternate tuning systems long before it was even practical for standard orchestras to perform them.
He was conceptualizing the space between the notes.
But thinking about it is one thing, actually making it happen is another. Which brings us to Harry Partch. The sources go deep on this guy, and his dedication is, well, it's bordering on madness.
Oh, absolutely. He's legendary for it.
He didn't just write outside the 12-note system. He realized standard instruments were totally useless to him. So he literally built entirely new, massive acoustic instruments from scratch.
He became a master carpenter and a physicist out of pure necessity.
Right. He's building giant marimbas with dozens of wooden blocks per octave and instruments made out of massive glass cloud chamber bowls that he salvaged from laboratories.
That's incredible.
He had to invent a 43-note scale just to hear the music he was hearing in his own head.
And while Partch was building entirely new physical objects, you had composers like Ben Johnston tackling the mathematics. Johnston expanded a concept called just intonation.
Which we definitely need to define because the sources throw that term around a lot. What does just intonation actually mean in practice?
So remember earlier when we said the modern piano was artificially engineered to be slightly out of tune so musicians could change keys?
Right, the compromise.
Just intonation rejects that compromise completely. It insists on tuning notes to the pure, perfect mathematical ratios found in natural physics.
The natural harmonic series.
Exactly. When you hear a chord played in pure, just intonation, it sounds incredibly resonant, almost impossibly pure, because the sound waves are aligning perfectly in the air without any of the friction of a piano.
Wow.
But mathematically, writing a complex symphony in just intonation is a nightmare of fractions and specific pitch adjustments. Johnston effectively created languages of harmony that were infinitely more complex than anything Bach or Mozart attempted.
You also have Alois Haba, who deeply explored quarter tone composition, effectively doubling the notes of the standard octave. But the composer who really caught my attention was Giacinto Scelsi.
Oh, Celsi is fascinating.
Because while Parch and Haba were expanding outward to get more notes, Scelsi went microscopically inward. He would write entire compositions obsessively focused on the tiny, infinitesimal fluctuations hiding inside a single note.
Just drilling down into one pitch?
It's like putting a microscope on a single drop of water and realizing there's an entire chaotic universe swimming around in there.
But the real turning point for all of this wasn't acoustic. It was the invention of electronics.
Ah, right.
For centuries, these composers were fighting against physical wood, brass, and string. They were fighting the physical limitations of human hands.
Right. And modern electronic musicians eventually realized that computers have no physical keyboards. A synthesizer doesn't care how hard it is to stretch your fingers across a fretboard.
And the machine doesn't have hands.
Exactly. Technology didn't invent microtonality. It just removed the physical cage that held all those earlier composers back. Suddenly, every single microscopic frequency between the keys was instantly accessible with the turn of a dial.
What's fascinating here is that it leads to a really crucial realization. As you listen to this, you might be thinking, well, I don't listen to 1950s experimental synthesizer music, and I've never heard of Giacinto Scelsi.
Right, like this whole microtonal thing doesn't apply to my life.
But the twist is, you hear microtonality every single day.
It is completely hiding in plain sight.
It is operating just below your conscious awareness all the time.
Uh-huh.
Think about film scores. Film composers rely heavily on drifting pitch clusters to fill you with dread. But why does drifting pitch equal dread?
It goes back to evolutionary psychology. In the natural world, a pitch that is unstable, wavering, or sliding often signals danger.
Like what?
Think of the Doppler effect of a large object moving toward you very fast, or the unstable, shrieking distress cry of an animal. It bypasses your logical brain and hits your amygdala directly.
Oh, wow.
So when you're watching a horror movie and you feel that creeping terror before the monster even appears on screen, the composer is constantly bending the pitch of the strings. That is microtonality at work.
Video games do this constantly, too. They use unstable tunings in the background music to subconsciously signal that enemies are nearby.
Yes.
Your brain registers the prediction error and immediately tells your nervous system, something is wrong in this environment, get ready to run.
And modern pop music does it too, just more subtly. Synthesizers are programmed with microscopic pitch variations to make the tracks feel warmer or more analog, mimicking the imperfections of old tape machines.
It's everywhere.
And perhaps most universally, human singers naturally slide between notes. When a great soul or blues singer bends a note, they are traveling through microtonal space to convey raw emotion. The truth is, perfect tuning is a human myth.
So we move from this subconscious evolutionary dread that film composers exploit to modern artists who drag that instability out into the light and make it the entire point of their work.
The avant-garde folks.
Right. The sources highlight artists like Engine de Poitrine. And what is so striking about this kind of music is how it totally redefines what makes us uncomfortable.
It's a different kind of heavy.
Usually if a band wants to make you uncomfortable, they just blast a wall of distortion or they play incredibly fast or the vocalist screams.
It's an assault of volume or speed. It's aggressive.
Right. But in this music, the discomfort comes purely from the acoustic instability. Texture completely replaces harmony.
You're focusing on the sound itself.
You aren't listening for a catchy melody. You are listening to how the sound physically vibrates and rubs against itself in the air. I was trying to figure out how to frame this experience, and the best way I can describe it is this. When you listen to this music, it stops feeling like you are being entertained, and it starts feeling like you're being oriented.
Oriented. That is a vital distinction.
Maybe.
It changes the listener's job completely.
Yes. You stop asking the music, what song is this?
Yeah.
And you start asking yourself, where am I? It creates an environment, a physical, atmospheric space that you are standing inside of, rather than a linear narrative you are just passively watching go by.
And if we pull back and connect this to the bigger picture, it touches on some really deep philosophical questions about how we view the world.
How so?
Well, Western music, and maybe Western culture in general, is inherently obsessed with resolution. We want the tension to resolve into a stable chord. We want the neatly tied bow at the end of the story.
We want the happy ending.
Right. But microtonality questions whether we need that resolution at all. Physics shows us that frequencies are a continuous, unbroken spectrum. Sound is just waves vibrating in the air. Only humans draw borders on it and say, this note is correct and this note is a mistake.
We are projecting our need for borders onto the physics of the universe.
Precisely. And this isn't just an acoustic theory. Look at traditional Japanese aesthetics like wabi-sabi.
Oh, right, the beauty of imperfection.
Yes, it actively embraces imperfection. It's the idea that a cracked asymmetrical bowl is inherently more beautiful than a factory-perfect, mathematically symmetrical one because the crack shows the reality of existence.
It's honest.
Exactly. It reminds us that beauty does not require absolute certainty. The borders we place on sound, much like the borders we place on many things, are entirely imaginary.
So what does this all mean for us? We have this challenging music that intentionally breaks our cultural programming. It creates physical unease. It strips away our emotional shortcuts, and it drops us into an environment of pure uncertainty.
It sounds exhausting when you put it like that.
It really does. How are we supposed to engage with something that difficult moving forward?
Well, the neuroscientists in our sources offer a truly hopeful discovery here. Your brain is not permanently locked into its programming.
Real.
It can learn entirely new emotional languages through a process called perceptual learning.
Meaning we can literally rewire our prediction machines. We aren't stuck with the Lego blocks.
Exactly. With repeated exposure, the auditory cortex begins to build new probabilities. It maps new territory. What initially sounds disturbing, chaotic, or even painful to you can actually become deeply beautiful as your brain learns the new patterns.
So it just saves time.
Yeah, think about musical history. When jazz first emerged, many classically trained listeners thought it sounded like pure, unstructured chaos.
They hated it.
And when Igor Stravinsky premiered The Rite of Spring, the rhythmic dissonance was so unexpected it literally caused riots in the theater.
People were throwing things and fighting in the aisles over a ballet.
Because their brains couldn't process the prediction errors. Early electronic music sounded completely alien to audiences in the 1950s. But now,
It's everywhere.
those sounds are completely familiar to us. We hear jazz in elevators. We hear synthesizers in car commercials. They don't cause us any prediction error at all anymore.
Wow.
The takeaway here is that emotional discomfort when listening to something new is not a failure of the music. It is an education for your brain.
It is your brain physically stretching to accommodate a bigger, more complex reality. Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today, something to mull over that extends way beyond the notes on a page or a piano keyboard.
I love where this is going.
Think about the physical panic we've been discussing. If our brains can physically panic, tense up, and create genuine sweating anxiety over a single wrong musical note simply because it breaks our learned cultural expectations.
Just from one note.
Right? What happens when we encounter a completely foreign idea? What happens when we are confronted with a political perspective or a different culture's way of life that doesn't fit neatly into our personal 12-tone grid?
That raises a profound question about how we process the world around us and, how quick we are to judge what feels dissonant.
Are we rejecting those new ideas because they are objectively, factually wrong? Or are we rejecting them simply because our brains are experiencing a massive prediction error?
Because we lost our familiar shortcut.
Exactly. Because we can't find that familiar, comforting harmonic shortcut we were raised with. Maybe the next time you feel that tight chest, that deep defensive discomfort in a difficult conversation, or when encountering a totally alien viewpoint, you aren't actually under attack.
It's just perceptual learning.
Maybe you are just experiencing the friction of your own boundaries expanding. Maybe you are just becoming a different kind of listener.